Welcome to this Tutor to You AQA A-Level Sociology Paper 1 and Paper 3 walkthrough. In this video we're going to look at theory and methods and a 10-mark outline and explain question on values and research. The 10-mark outline and explain questions appear on both Paper 1 and Paper 3 and they're focused on either research methods, theory, debates or a combination of these factors. Students should answer these questions with 2 extended paragraphs, each providing a clear way, reason or criticism that answers the question. Now in this type of question there is no credit given for evaluation of points, so you need to focus on providing very good knowledge with clear analysis and using some examples to get into the 8 to 10 level of the mark scheme. In this video we're focusing on the debates, and what we mean by debates are the key sociological debates within the theory and methods section that you would normally study in year 13. So for example, things like sociology as a science, value-free and value-laden sociology, the relationship between sociology and social policy, whether sociology should inform social policy, whether it does inform social policy and why it does not. The extent to which society is postmodern, whether we live in a postmodern age, a late modern age or the modern age. And the theoretical debates, whether consensus or conflict theories are best for understanding society, whether structural or social action theories are best for understanding society. As you can see, there is some overlap with other areas, for example methods with sociology as a science and value-free and value-laden sociology, and theory with consensus and conflict and structural and social action. We're going to look at this question in this video, which has been written by Tutor to You for the purposes of this video. It does reflect the style of questions that are asked on the AQA A-Level Paper 1 and Paper 3 for the 10-mark theory and methods question. This question is asking students to outline and explain 2 ways that a sociologist's values can influence their research. The first thing we need to do here is decode the question and see what it is really asking us to do. Often these questions can be worded in a very tricky manner that catches some students out. So let's decode the question. First of all, we have sociologists' values. Now this can include their interests, their preference, their ideologies. This can include whether they are a Marxist, a functionalist, a feminist, whether they prefer positivist methods or interpretivist methods. It can also talk about their personal interests, what topic area they like to choose. We also need to tie this into how it influences their research. Now the research we can talk about here is the choice of topic, the method, and how they interpret the data that is presented. Now we have to link the value into a way in which it influences their research. So let's look at some examples of how we might do this. First of all, we can talk about the sociologist's theoretical perspective. For example, Marxists will often look at issues of social inequality, particularly social class inequality, and this will influence their research topic. Likewise, feminists will focus on gender inequalities. We can also consider the type of data, and this can also be linked to methodological preference, but the type of data that the sociologist prefers can influence their research. If they prefer to use qualitative data, this might influence the choice of methods that they select. The relationship with participants. Now, we've mentioned feminism already. Well, feminist methodologies look to empower those that they are researching, and so therefore they may be more likely to choose methods that are qualitative and they can develop a rapport with the participants, and this influences their research. Their methodological perspective. This is going to have a huge impact on their choice of methods. Positivists prefer methods that are rich in quantitative data, whereas interpretivists prefer methods that will give meaning and motivations behind people's behaviours. They're more likely to pick unstructured interviews, participant observations, for example. Aims of their research: how do they perceive the place of sociology in society? Is it to bring about social change, or is it to act as a commentary on the rest of society? Well, this will influence their research. It may influence their research by the scale of the research that they undertake. It may influence their research by the methods that they choose to look at, so they get more validity. And their choice of topic. Now, of course, this can be influenced by the sociologist's personal interests. Sociologists tend to specialise in certain areas of society, as you may have noticed across the specification. A good example is somebody like Steve Bruce, who specialises in religious beliefs. So now we need to make some links between sociologists' values and how these influence their research. I've selected one way, which is interpreting data, and how sociologists might interpret the data that they are presented with, and using this to say how it will influence their research. If a sociologist has a very subjective view of their results, for example, an interpretivist, they may look to select qualitative data, which obviously influences the research and the research methods. We can also link this into a sociologist's theoretical view. Certain sociological theories prefer certain types of methods. For example, our more structural theories prefer positivist methods. And how does this then impact on the research? And this is our final part that we need to look at. Our second one, the choice of topic. And again, we can link this into the sociologist's area of interest. Are they interested in social inequalities? Are they interested in a broader view of society? Are they interested in education, religion, culture and identity? How does this reflected by their personal and political views? And we might use some examples here. And then how does this influence their research? Let's have a look at a sample response. So starting with interpreting data, one way values can influence research is during the interpretation of results. We need to develop this further. Even when sociologists collect data in a scientific or neutral way, their own beliefs may still shape how they understand what the data means. How do we explain this? Let's use an example. For example, two sociologists might look at the same statistics on crime but come to a different conclusion. A new right sociologist might argue that rising crime is due to a breakdown of traditional values, like single-parent families or welfare dependency. A left realist, however, might say the problem is inequality, poverty, and a lack of opportunities. So they will be influenced by their viewpoint and how they interpret those results. This shows that values can influence how sociologists explain what they find. Even if the evidence is the same, their political or moral views affect how they interpret it. Let's develop this a bit further. This is especially true when sociologists use qualitative methods like interviews or observation. So we're using another example here. These methods involve the researcher getting close to the people they're studying, which means their personal views can affect how they ask questions, what they notice, and how they analyse behaviour. For example, functionalists may see religion as a positive and might focus on how it brings community and comfort, while Marxists might focus on how religion can be oppressive or cause conflict. So you can see here we've used a couple of examples to really show our understanding of how a sociologist's values can influence their interpretation of data. This level of analysis and this use of very good knowledge of how sociologists conduct their research would help us to get into that 8 to 10 band if we repeated this with our second way. Our second way a sociologist's value can influence their research is through their choice of topic. A sociologist's background, beliefs or political views can lead them to focus on certain areas of society. For example, feminist sociologists often choose to research topics such as domestic violence, gender inequality, or the way that girls are treated in schools. So I'm giving examples of feminist research here. This is because they value gender equality, so they want to highlight unfair treatment of women and challenge patriarchy. Similarly, Marxist sociologists are more likely to study class inequality, poverty or exploitation in the workplace because they are interested in how capitalism creates inequality. What I've done here is I've shown a good knowledge of how values can influence the choice of topic. I may need to develop it a bit further to get that very good knowledge, so I'm going to use an example. This means that sociologists don't always study topics just because they are neutral or random. They often choose topics that reflect their personal or political concerns. For example, Willis focused on working class boys because he was interested in how the education system keeps social class inequality going. And of course, Willis studied boys from the town that he grew up in. He was from a similar working class background to them. His values therefore influenced the research that he was undertaking. His values as a Marxist influenced not only what he studied, but also how he interpreted the data. It's a little bit of a link back to our first point here. He saw the boys' behaviour as resistance to capitalism. So we can see that his choice of topic, choosing to study education, was influenced by his values, his political values, his theoretical values as a Marxist, and he looked at social inequality. What we've done here is we've shown very good knowledge of the topic area and how values can influence sociological research. Now, the debates questions can be framed in a variety of ways. From a particular perspective, for example, outline and explain 2 features of postmodern society, or in the 20-mark questions, they'll often be phrased as a debate. Using the same example, it can be evaluate the view that we are living in a postmodern age. There is often a middle ground in these debates, which makes for a good conclusion. In the example I've just cited, our middle ground would be late modernity as opposed to post-modernity or modernity, and this can be seen as being quite a sophisticated conclusion to make. That concludes this Tutor to You AQA A-Level Sociology Paper 1, Paper 3 walkthrough on theory and methods. In this video we looked at a 10-mark outline and explain debate question looking at values and research. Thanks for watching.